Okay, we're ready. Okay, we are starting chapter Yud chapter 14, which is one of the most exciting chapters. The reason why it's one of the most exciting chapters is that we have now finished basically all the descriptions. We went through in chapters 1 through 9 the descriptions of how the Nefesh Elokis works, the Nefesh Bahamis works. We talked about the essence of the Nefesh Elokis. We talked about the characteristics of the Nefesh Elokis. We talked about the garments of the Nefesh Elokis. We talked about Torah mitzvahs. We talked about the Nefesh Bahamis, what its characteristics are, what it's doing, its garments, what klipa is, what the sitra acher is, all of these different things. Chapter 9, we discussed the idea of the fight between the Nefesh Elokis and the Nefesh Bahamis. Chapter 10, we discussed what is a tzaddik. Chapter 11, we discussed what is a rasha. And finally, chapters 12 and 13, we described a Beinani. And here we go. Now is really where we put into practice all this background, and we really start to discuss the idea of these two different ways that the Tanya is based on. There are two different systems, so to speak, of how to serve Hashem according to the Chabad way. Okay? Both are dealing with the mind directing the heart, directing the emotions. The question is, however, are we talking about a holistic approach, which we're going to call the longer way, or are we talking about a shorter approach, which is more like we would describe a Tylenol, how to fix a problem? It's not going to actually fix the problem, but it's going to stop, right, the pain right now. That's chapters 18 through 25. Let me give you an example, a mashal for this. So, in terms of using the intellect to direct the emotions, right? We're talking about our love for Hashem, our love for Yiddishkeit, and how it manifests in terms of our doing Torah mitzvahs, right? Now, in terms of relationships, there are two basic types of relationships that we're going to be focusing in on. One type of relationship is, let's say you imagine that you go and you go to a party and you meet someone at the party. And you say, oh, you're from Westchester. Oh, it's so interesting. You know, oh, where did you go to school? Oh, you went to school. Oh, where did you go to college? Oh, you went there to college. Do you know this person? Do you know that person? Oh, you went here, you went there. Oh, you were part of this youth group, or you were that youth group, or you were part of this, you were part of that. What we're doing essentially with all of these words and all of these questions are we're making connections with the other person. We're developing a relationship. You meet him. You've never seen each other before in your lives. Right? And all of a sudden, you start to recognize that really you have a lot of similarities. You went to similar schools, you know similar people, you like this, he likes that, right? All these different areas that you have ways of connecting. Those areas of connection then act as the foundation of this relationship. But in order for the relationship to work, usually what has to happen is that you have to build those connections. You have to recognize where they are. You have to develop them. You have to think about them. You have to recognize what you have in common, what you don't have in common. And as you're going to see more and more things that you have in common and people that you know that are similar, so then you're going to get more of an excitement and you're going to get more of a closer relationship with this other person. Now contrast that with a person's relationship to his parents. Now, I'm not talking about any of the psychology, just normal, straight, whatever, right? A person doesn't have to come up with ideas of why they love their mother and father. There's no connections that you have to make. It just is. It's a deep-seated love that every human being has for their parent, right? It takes a lot, right, of unfortunately, things that happen in relationships sometimes, even with one's parents, that cause the relationship to go sour or cause the relationship to go better. But in the essence of the relationship, you already have a relationship with your parent. That's just the way it is. You don't have to develop, right? This is similar to the two types of love that we're going to be talking about going forward. One is a created love, one that you're manufacturing in your mind. when you think about Hashem, and you think about what Hashem does for you, and think about Hashem, how He reacts to the world, and how He's involved in the world, and how He's creating the world, and how He's this, and how He's that, and you start to get all of these details and all of this information, and as you process this information, you begin to develop this feeling of love for Hashem, that you want to do His mitzvahs, you want to be more involved in Yiddishkeit, you want to, for many different reasons why, but that is the basis of it. On the other hand, since my soul is coming from God, I have a natural relationship with Him. That is just the way I was made. And that's what we're going to be discussing in chapters 18, 19 on. Now, we alluded to it a little bit in the last couple of chapters when we talked about a little bit this idea of a hidden love that's inside of us. That's what it was referring to. So now, with all this as a background, let's jump into Perek Yud Daled. It says like this. Perek Yud Daled. V'hine midas habeinani hi midas kol adam. The way, the measurement of the beinani is the measurement of every single person. V'acharecha kol adam yimshoch. After it, everyone is being drawn. Shekol adam yochol lios beinani, because every single person can be a beinani b'chol esav b'chol shad at any given moment and time. Now, that sentence is very problematic. And the reason why it's problematic is because if you turn back to Perek Yud Beis, we just got through saying, when we learned chapter 12, that what? That a Beinani, right, says like this. I'm going to read a little bit inside in chapter Yud Beis, right? He says like this. Ha-Beinani hu shala'olam ein hara goyver. That a Beinani is someone that for all times the evil will not goiver, not win out, kol kach, lichvoish es ha'ir kedana, to conquer the small city, leislabesh baguf, in order to enclose himself within the body, lahachtia, in order to cause him to do sin, right? And then it says like this, skipping down, and he says like this, he says, heim levada mislabshin baguf, that only the godly soul is enclosed within the body, shehem machshava dibur ma'isa, which is a thought, speech, and action, shaltari mitzvahs, hatara, v'lo avar avera miyamav, and he's never done a sin in his entire life, v'lo yavar le'olam, and he'll never do a sin. So how in the world does the Alter Rebbe in chapter 12 describe a Beinani by saying he never did a sin and he never will do a sin? And then in chapter 14, he turns around and says, this is the midah of every single person. And any person could be a Beinani at any given moment, at any time. It's a contradiction. You're saying two opposite things here. Now we know that in chapter 12, when we're talking about a Beinani over there, and it says he never did a sin in his whole life, it doesn't mean that he never did a sin in his whole life necessarily. And if you remember our discussion over there in that class, we talked about how it's just so, I'm going to use a Yiddish word, abgefragt. It's so out of the question by him to do a sin. He's gotten to a point in his being that it's completely abgefragt. Meaning what? And the example, if you remember, that we used is, for example, a person that's on Yom Kippur, all of a sudden an idea pops up into his mind about eating a steak. Now, no one in their right mind that's a religious Jew is going to eat a steak in the middle of Yom Kippur day. That's just not, it's not happening. It's completely, use the same word again, abgefragt. It's out of the question. It's not a possibility. It's never going to happen. That's not what we're talking about. So we see here that there's two distinct discussions going on. In chapter 12, what we were discussing was the madrega of a Beinani, the level of a person that's reached the level of a Beinani. That's one concept. In chapter 14, we're changing gears. We're going in a different direction now. What we're talking about in chapter 14 is every single person is able to reach the midah of a Beinani, the measurement of a Beinani, the qualities of a Beinani at any given moment. Why? We're going to explain in a minute. But after, in this area, every single person is, as it says here, yimshach, is being drawn to it. Because that's how he was created. He was created in such a way that really he wants to do the right thing. He wants to be in control of himself 24/7, going according to our description of a Beinani. He does want that. It's just a matter of doing it. I've told you the story before, the great story about Reb Nissen Nemenov, the great mashpia from Brinois, right? One of the great Hasidim of the past of our generation. It says about him that someone asked him once, how can you become a Beinani? So he says, it's very simple. I said, what do you mean it's very simple? Very simple. Can you control yourself from hitting your friend for a minute? I said, yeah, I think I could do that. Okay, good. Can you control yourself from speaking something not nice about someone else, or speaking not nicely to another person for 1 minute? I think I could do that as well. Can you control yourself for 1 minute of time not to think any negative thoughts? It's a little harder, it's true, but I think I can do that as well. Okay. So Reb Nissen said to him, that's all you have to do. Just take every minute, 1 minute at a time. That story is gold. It's diamonds for us. Because that's what the Alter Rebbe is showing us here. What the Alter Rebbe is showing us is that it's not about worrying about how to become a something. It's right now, what choice am I making? It's about the here and the now. That's what it's about. So when I was 17, I thought when I get older, I want to be this. And when I was 20, I said, when I get older, I want to be this. And when I was 30, and when I was 40, and when I'm 50, right, I say, when I get older, I want to be this. I know it's hard for you to believe that. When you're 50, you think, well, it's still along the same lines. When I'm going to get older, I'm going to think. But that's how we're wired to think. When I'll get older, I will become. But really, where it's at is right now, in the next minute, what am I going to choose to do? It's not about worrying about when I get older. It's right at this moment. And that's what the Alter Rebbe is setting forward right now in our beginning of our discussion of how to go about doing this. Don't worry about what you're going to become. Focus on what choice am I making right this second. And that has to be in the forefront of our minds. What choice am I making now? And that's what he says. Shekol Adam Yochol Lios Beinani, because every single person could be a Beinani b'chol eis b'chol sha'ah, at any given moment. At any given moment, he could choose not to do this and instead to do that. Or choose to, from the beginning, to do this. Whatever it is. Whether it's in any area, like it says, Ki abeinini eino mo'us bera. Why? Because a beinini is not disgusted by the evil. Shezeu davar himsor lelev. Because that is something that's given over into a person's heart. V'lo kol ha'esim shavos. And not all times are equal. Like we learned in chapter 12, and then we discussed it again to a certain extent in chapter 13, about how, yes, in the times of davening, when a person's on fire, certain things are up. And after that energy goes away, right? So he's not holding on the same level anymore. But here, what he's saying is, we're not talking about what you're made of. We're not talking about what's in my inside. What's in my inside, whether I really hate evil or not, is not relevant to our discussion. That's not up to me. That's not the way I was created. I was created with whatever capabilities, whatever intellect, whatever I have here, right now. The question is, what am I going to do with it? That's what the Alter Rebbe is saying here. So if the idea of Yiddishkeit was, I want to become a tzaddik, for example, So then you have a big problem, because you love these things that you shouldn't be doing when you were 13 years old, and you love them still when you're 30 years old, and you love them still when you're 50 years old. And so you ask yourself the question, what have I accomplished in life? I'm still holding in the same place as I was when I was 13. Yes, hopefully I'm a little bit more mature, but really I'm still holding the same place. So a person could get completely depressed by this, and that's what he talks about, right? He talks about that in chapter 27. But in essence, that's not what the goal is, as we talked about in the title page. The goal is not change your inside. The goal is what? The goal is taking control of every moment of your life. That's what the goal is. If that's the goal, what the Alter Rebbe is saying here, that energy was given over to me. And that's what he says. Because a Beinani is not disgusted by the evil. Because that's something that's given over to the heart. And not all the times are equal. Only go away from evil. Do good. Namely, b'payil mamish. It means in your actions, in your doing, in the actuality. That's what we're looking for here. We're not looking for the capability of what you can and can't do. We're talking about what are you doing? What are you doing with your life? That's the idea here. That's what we're talking about. What am I doing right now, this minute, right? At this moment of time. That's all that really matters. That's all that's really relevant. But pa'il mamish, and then he says very interesting thing. This is a key line. B'maiser dibur umachshava. In action, in speech, and in machshava. Notice how he goes from the easiest thing to control to the hardest thing to control. It's easiest to not punch your chavrusa. The next easiest is to not speak not nicely. Close your mouth. Don't say what you don't need to say. Right? My mother always used to say, if you don't have anything nice to say, don't say anything. Right? We all learned that. We all probably heard that growing up, right? Just close your mouth. Control it. And then machshava. Machshava is much more complicated, but you still can do it. And then he says, look, listen to these words. Shebehem ha-bechira b'ha-yecholis v'ha-reshus nesuna l'kol adam. Is essential words here. The first step in this process is bechira, the choice. All I have to do is I have to make the choice. I have to make the choice. I have to decide, this is the direction I want to go in. This is the way that I want to do. I have to choose it. Once I've chosen that this is what I'm going to do, yecholis, I have the capability to do it. I have the capability. I'm able to do it. I'm able. And reshus, it's in my domain. It's in my capability. I'm going to follow through with this. These are words that the Rambam uses in Hilchas Tshuva, right? But these three words are the key. Knowing that it's up to my bechira. Where I am in my life is my bechira. What happens outside of me and all the different curveballs that Hashem sends me in life is not my bechira. It's not my choice. That's up to Hashem. Hashem uses all different people throughout the day to send me different messages and send me different curveballs and fastballs and all different things. That's not in my domain, so to speak. That's not in my reshus. What is in my reshus is my bechira, is my choice of how I'm going to play the game, how I'm going to react, how am I going to take the first step forward. And once I make that decision of the bechira, the yecholis is given over to me. The capabilities to handle whatever is coming my way has been given over to me by God Himself. That's how I am wired. That's how we're all wired. It's just a matter of making that choice, that this is the choice I'm going to make. This is how I'm going to handle it. And once you have that, habechira v'ayachos v'reshus nesuna lekol adam has been given over to every individual la'asois to do, v'ledavar ledaber to speak, v'lichshoiv and to think. Now listen to the next words. Gam mashu neged ta'avas libo v'havcha mamish. Even something that is totally the opposite of the desires of a person's heart, to the point that it's completely 180 degrees opposite of where they are. In other words, I could have this unbelievable desire to do something, to act in a certain way. If I choose, I do not have to listen to my animal soul. I do not have to listen to my nature. I can choose to do the opposite. Because why? Because Hashem has given me the capability to be able to win out over myself. I can do it. But the first step is the choice. I have to choose that this is how I am going to live my life. This is the way we're going to do it. But as the Alter Rebbe has been saying, we're going to conclude with this point. It's not about becoming a something. It's not about becoming a level of a Beinani, the level of a tzaddik, the level of a whatever. It's about choosing, how am I going to fill the next moment of my life here in this world? That is up to me, that I have to decide. And once I am able to decide that, then Hashem says, here's the yicholos, here's the capability. Go ahead, go take care of it. It's in your domain, it's in your rishus, it's in your area, it's in your capability to follow through. Just choose it and do it. And that's what it's about. Okay, that's it for today. Well, Mitzvah Hashem will continue tomorrow.
Thank you.